Thank you, Josh. And thank you to all the other organizers of the conference. And thank you, IIIF. I am new to all of this. I've been sort of actively engaged with IIIF for somewhere on the order of 6 months. So I thought I'd bring to it a perspective a little bit from my own background in Slavic languages and literatures, and apply a set of concepts and principles from literary and poetic theory. Take it as you will. So first I want to say, by way of apology, that this is not a slideshow. I put together my presentation in Scalar, and largely because I believe that in a certain sense, the kind of high stakes communication at the beginning and end points of a lot of academic discourse occur in Microsoft Word and PowerPoint, and to some degree efface the power of high quality interactive media such as IIIF, and essentially keep it a kind of marginalized. I'm going to run you through hopefully 4 sections: theory, some practice, a couple examples of pilot curriculum that just concluded at UCLA, and if time permits, to share a brief kind of manifesto of sorts for thought. And in the process, I hope to get to basically 2 key points. One of them is that reuse rather than use is the critical intellectual practice at the heart of an emergent digital curriculum using IIIF and kindred technologies. And a second point, which is somewhat obscure at this point, but hopefully I'll tease it out, is vertical interoperability enables the projection of curatorial practice into curricular learning activities. So that's a kind of involved idea. So I thought I would quote my favorite, somewhat obscure poetic theorist, Roman Jakobson, from a text language in operation about the word nevermore in Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. And bear with my my monotone. I'll try to give a little dramatic quality to this reading. Recently aboard a train, I overheard a scrap of conversation. A man said to a young lady, they were playing The Raven on the radio, an old record of a London actor dead for years. I wish you had heard his nevermore. Although I was not the addressee of the stranger's oral message, I received it nevertheless and later transposed this utterance first into handwritten and then into printed symbols. Now it has become part of a new framework, my message to the prospective reader of these pages. The stranger resorted to a literary quotation, which apparently alluded to an emotional experience shared with his female interlocutor. He referred to a performance allegedly transmitted by broadcast. A dead British actor was the original sender of a message addressed to whom it may concern. He in turn had merely reproduced Edgar Allan Poe's literary message of 1845. Furthermore, the American poet himself was ostensibly only transmitting the confession of a lover lamenting his deceased mistress, perhaps the poet himself, perhaps some other man, real or imaginary. Within this monologue, the word nevermore is attributed to a talking bird with the further implication that one word uttered by the raven had been caught from some unhappy master as a melancholy burden of his customary laments. Thus, the same single word was successively set in motion by the hypothetical master, the raven, the lover, the poet, the actor, the radio station, the stranger on the train, and finally by the present author. And I should note that now I am speaking these words to you from a Scalar presentation over Zoom at a conference. Note that in all of this, Jakobson never mentioned anything about the word nevermore being consumed. And that's the key point here, is that Nevermore moves from context to context in the transmission of all kinds of discourses. And he goes on in this article to analyze the many ways that the word nevermore within the poem itself moves from moment to moment, fundamentally changing its meaning, significance, as well as function as a speech act. I want to tease out one other idea from Jakobson, which is in many ways a rite of passage for students of structuralist literary theory. The poetic function projects the principle of equivalence from the axis of selection into the axis of combination. And he goes on to say equivalence is promoted to the constitutive device of the sequence. So what does this really mean? Well, let's go to the Raven itself. And here is a beautiful illuminated manuscript in IIIF, which we can zoom in to examine and see the beginning. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary. So the point that Jakobson was making is that the two words dreary and weary occupy a relationship of substitution, or they rhyme. The latter part of the word is identical. And that relationship is horizontal, whereas in the poetic text, it is projected onto sequence. So we hear dreary first and weary second. And this principle pervades poetic language in many different ways that Jakobson explored in his career. So Jakobson, to a certain extent, is cribbed this idea from Ferdinand de Saussure, who introduced into linguistics the fundamental distinction or orthogonal distinction between the axis of simultaneities and the axis of successions. That is, language, according to de Saussure, could be understood as a system in one sense, but also a system that transitioned over time historically. But in Saussure's use, these were orthogonal in the sense that they were not related to each other. The system was integral at distinct moments in time. And what Jakobson brought into it is somewhat like the poetic equivalent of theory of relativity, whereby one axis is projected or transposed onto the other. So I have a sense that in thinking about and developing IIIF, the lion's share of focus and attention is on what I would call horizontal interoperability. That is the ability to substitute objects and items for one another from various institutions. This is a complex and extraordinary task that is already well on its way to achievement. And what I'd like to focus on is the vertical interoperability, conceiving of a process that is perhaps analogous to the vertical integration of industry, where you have, for example, in monopolies, control over raw materials, production process, distribution, and so forth. But inspired by Jakobson, to think about the transposition of one logic to the other axis. Okay, so all of this would be a pure abstraction, but it has some practical dimensions or qualities to it as well. And in that sense, I'm just going to show a quick example of how a IIIF resource might find itself in multiple contexts with various functions in an educational use scenario. So for example, one might pull a IIIF resource from the Smithsonian and view it in Mirador. For a researcher, this is fantastic because you can zoom in and see all kinds of details. In an educational setting, it raises all kinds of issues and challenges and problems, which is, for example, how do you get students to actually do something with this? How do you know how long they look at something? How does deep zoom translate into a learning activity? So in the next context, in this vertical integration, I suggest that the learning management system be deployed very actively. In this case, it's a screenshot from Canvas. I'll show you in a second an example from Moodle, where Mirador, the item, and other sorts of things can be dropped into the functions of a learning management system. And then as a third possible stage, the use of IIIF content in the same class that uses that same learning management system in a digital project, such as Scalar, as I'm using right now, to import IIIF resources and make use of annotation and the fantastic affordances within IIIF to pull up exactly the portions of an image that you need. So we tried that approach at UCLA in two pilot courses. History 97C, working with Professor Muriel McClendon, English historian, and Society and Genetics 182 with Professor Chenling Liu Zilioni. And the basic model that I helped support in this process was something called collections-based research in the curriculum. And I probably can't communicate all the nuances, but just by way of contrast with what I call the sort of standard or syllabus-driven model of curriculum design, course content is conceived somewhat on the basis of a text to be written, to be read or written. And that is a string of assignments over time, subject matter topics organized by chapters, et cetera, and that the act of designing curriculum is somewhat analogous to the writing or reading process, and the assignments themselves are often written texts. By contrast, the collections-based research in the curriculum model uses a curatorial approach. That is to say, to think about a finite set of curricular materials, often nonlinear, often object-based, that allows students to deepen their engagement with subject matter incrementally and to do it in dialogue with themselves and over a series of inquiry and production steps. So, for example, in History 97C, students pulled from items from the Clark Library's digital collection of annotated books. They used those and in the learning management system also learned relevant technologies, and then they culminated in a Scalar project that imported those items and used the affordances of IIIF and Scalar, both for the purpose of information literacy proficiency, but also to deeply examine the subject matter. And I will take a quick peek at a sample page. So you can see these are materials that were imported as links into Scalar from various sources. This is from Yale Center for British Art. This is from the Calisphere instance of the Clark Library collection. And then as part of their analysis, students imported fragments using the standard IIIF URI to focus exactly on what it is that they want to. And similarly, in a course in a different discipline, doing robust annotations on media that is sourced from these high quality collections at cultural heritage and scientific institutions. So as they went through this process, they are both learning the technology and they are deeply diving into the subject matter. So as I sort of stop and think about what is the sort of import or relevance, I think there are a few kind of key points that I'd like to tease out as a sort of a manifesto of sorts that also has practical application. Firstly, content management is learning management, that the ability to handle rich media content, metadata in various contexts, to critically analyze it, and then share it with the rest of the world. These are all key proficiencies. Secondly, that curriculum is a sequence of required learning activities, not an exploration of inspiring material. I think that's a real challenge when we think about critical uses, educational uses, sorry, of resources such as IIIF. We are focused on what technologies and the systems can do, but in curriculum, the question is, what do you make students do with it? Secondly, that thought is an embodied intellectual practice. And I'm generally focused in this case on the presupposition that that education is focused on presenting material or content to students who read it and then absorb it and have it in their minds. And I think a more optimal approach is that not only do the students absorb it, but in passing it along, they integrate the intellectual and the sort of hands-on, practical, technical aspect. And then lastly, about the diplomatic work around vertical integration of IIIF content and technologies. And that is the great work that's been done getting various museums, archives, libraries, universities, et cetera, to play nice with each other. All that has to be achieved as well intra-institutionally in an educational setting, so that libraries particularly and archives find a way to work hand in hand with faculty who have almost sole domain over the curriculum of the students. And in that sense, I would just say that the approach I would advocate is not to break down the silos, rather to develop a good, strong, convenient infrastructure and helpful pedagogical frameworks that essentially can transcend those boundaries the way, for example, that light rail or a highway might transcend a political boundary between two different states. So that's all I have to say. I'm happy to respond to any thoughts or questions in Huva.
That's great. Thank you, Christopher. Really, really lovely way of presenting all of that. So we are right at time, but I see there are a couple of questions and a couple chats in the session page. I see at least two questions. They're both from Brian Haberberger, so maybe that's partly a prompt just to get you two conversing. But I am gonna stop the recording here, but as you said, maybe we can continue the conversation on there. This is the last session of the day until folks want to join us for the IIIF in China community event. That's happening in a few hours, but otherwise, no more events until tomorrow. With a thank you to you, Christopher, and others for joining us here. Appreciate you joining, and we'll see you at future events.